Hello, it is a pleasure to be with you all. To this day, there is no truly efficient way to travel through time. We have yet to develop a spacecraft capable of approaching the speed of light or positioning humans near a black hole to exploit the effects of time dilation and leap hundreds or thousands of years into the future. Even if such a feat were possible, the cost would be devastating. If you were to travel 100 years into the future, it would mean that upon your return, everyone you ever knew, your family, your friends, and your loved ones, would have long since passed away. If you traveled thousands of years, entire civilizations might have transformed or vanished by the time you returned. This is a form of time travel that we might call inefficient. It works in theory, but it is far too costly and impractical. But what if we are looking in the wrong direction? What if time travel doesn't necessarily require the movement of the physical body, but rather a shift of the mind from the past to the future and back again? In this way, travelers could still reunite with their loved ones, making the journey truly meaningful. Of course, we would have to navigate a labyrinth of paradoxes associated with time travel, but that is a topic for another video. Today, I want to tell you the story of a man who supposedly traveled to the year 3906 and recorded everything he saw. Let's listen to what the future looks like through the eyes of someone who claimed to have witnessed it firsthand. In May 1921, Paul Amadeus Dienach was a Swiss teacher working as a German instructor at a university in Greece. During one of his classes, he suddenly felt dizzy and fell into a deep coma. When he regained consciousness several hours later, the hospital room had completely changed. People were wearing strange outfits and speaking a language that he, a language teacher, could not understand. One of the doctors managed to speak a few broken words of German and told Dienach that he was actually Andrew Northam, a famous physics professor who had been involved in a serious accident. Dienach insisted he had no idea who Northam was, but when he looked in the mirror, he saw a completely unfamiliar face. Panicked and distraught, he began to cry, fearing he had either died or lost his mind. He tearfully explained that he was merely a language teacher from Switzerland and had no idea what was happening. Upon hearing him mention Switzerland, someone asked him what year it was. Dienach replied that it was 1921. An elderly doctor stepped forward and informed him that the year was actually 3906. Naturally, Dienach did not believe it. But when the window curtains were drawn back and he saw buildings rising higher than the clouds and flying vehicles gliding past the window, he fainted from the sheer shock. A few days later, once Dienach was able to walk, he was visited by two elderly men known as the electors, individuals with a profound and comprehensive understanding of the human spirit and mind in this era. They explained that Dienach might have experienced a rare spiritual phenomenon known as a conscious slide. When Andrew Northam was injured in his accident, he had been clinically dead for 15 minutes. Doctors had frozen his brain and successfully revived his heart. The electors believed that this was the moment Paul Dienach's mind was transferred into Andrew Northam's body, 2,000 years in the future. The electors explained that time is not a linear path. Every person's consciousness exists across all times and places. In other words, unlike the physical body, the mind can travel through time without limits under special circumstances. The electors summoned Stefan, Andrew Northam's close friend, and asked him to keep Dienach's true identity a secret while helping him recover his memory. They believed this process would eventually reverse the mental shift and return Dienach to his own time. In the days that followed, while Stefan worked hard to help Dienach learn about modern society, the reluctant time traveler was only interested in the past. During his first 2 weeks in the future, Dienach could not sleep. He stayed awake all night, reading books and learning the new language tirelessly. Dienach described a device called the Reagan Swagger, a handheld tool that displayed glowing 3D holographic images in the dark, complete with sound, music, and storytelling. In the 1920s, the most modern learning tools Dienach had ever seen were books. The first microchip wouldn't even be invented until 1971, 50 years later. Either Dienach had an incredibly vivid imagination, or he truly did travel through time and saw a version of an iPad from the year 3906. The electors were high-level entities. Somehow, they locked 20th century world history away from Dienach. They did not want him to return to his own time and become a prophet, potentially disrupting the sacred timeline. It sounds like something straight out of a movie, doesn't it? But what about the rest of history? In 3906, Dienach studied thousands of years of human history. Between the years 2000 and 2300, humanity struggled with overpopulation and conflict. In 2004, we colonized Mars, a bit later than the calculations of NASA and Elon Musk. After 60 years, the population on Mars reached 20 million. However, in 2265, a catastrophic collision destroyed the entire Martian colony, permanently crushing humanity's aspirations for space expansion. In 2309, a nuclear war broke out and lasted for 8 years, resulting in the destruction of most of the human population. In the end, only the Baltic and Scandinavian nations, along with their languages, survived. In 2396, a new world government called Restart was established, marking the end of ancient history and the beginning of the modern era. In 2823, a world leader named Thorhild initiated a new economic system. Each person would work for 40 years and then retire. Gradually, technology and automation advanced to the point that by the time Paul arrived in 3906, people only needed to work for 2 years in their entire lives. That's right, you didn't mishear that. In the future world, children are educated from a young age and begin working at 17. Consequently, these future youths retire at age 19. Each person only needs to work hard for 2 years, after which they can retire and do whatever they desire. By the beginning of the 40th century, all material needs, from food and clothing to housing, education, and even entertainment, were fully met. Humans lived in a society based on the principle of, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. There were still those who chose to pursue careers, like Andrew Northam becoming a physicist, but one could live a life of leisure as long as those 2 years of labor were completed. This is essentially the ideal model of socialism. In reality, this model often fails because societies contain individuals with low productivity who still wish to consume based on their desires. For this society to function, everyone, and I emphasize everyone, must work for the common good. Human nature is inherently selfish. We often want the best for ourselves and leave the disadvantages to others. But in the future, we are no longer just human. According to what Dienach discovered, starting around the year 3000, a strange phenomenon called the pain of enlightenment began to occur. Some people suddenly gained a new type of sense. Their brain structure changed abruptly. They evolved and developed a new sensory capability. It was like an instantaneous enlightenment that allowed them to immediately perceive a new realm of existence and unlock an infinite amount of spiritual knowledge. They called this new sense supervision. Supervision brought humans feelings of extreme happiness and mental peace. It was described as divine joy, an acceptance of death, and a total disregard for trivial material things. These emotions came so intensely that they initially caused panic, and everyone who first experienced the pain of enlightenment died with an ecstatic, satisfied expression on their face. Everything changed on May 6, 3382, when a 76-year-old man named Alexis Vokey experienced the pain of enlightenment and survived. From then on, everyone was able to survive the process. With these new senses unlocked, Homo sapiens evolved into Homo occidentalis novus, or the new Western man. As human nature changed, we no longer fought, acted selfishly, or stepped on one another to survive. Instead, we began to work for the collective. Currency and laws became unnecessary once greed, anger, and ignorance were eliminated. Selfishness became a concept studied as a legacy of Homo sapiens, a less evolved species. Through Stefan, Dienach also learned that aliens are real, and they are not the planet-destroying races we often fear. It turns out they also went through an enlightenment process and decided to let us walk our own path, only intervening a few times when our species was on the brink of self-destruction. If you think Paul Amadeus Dienach's Adventure to the Future is just a science fiction novel, you might be mistaken. It is actually a romance. When Paul was a young man, he fell in love with a girl named Anna from his village. Although they loved each other deeply, their families forbade the relationship, a classic tragedy. During their final meeting, they sat on a hill covered in white flowers. Before parting, Anna promised that if they ever met again, she would make a flower wreath for him to place on her head. But Paul never saw Anna again, and this haunted him for the rest of his life. Back in 3906, Dienach became acquainted with a woman named Sylvia. One day, they traveled together on a flying vehicle that could transport them anywhere on Earth almost instantly. They spent the day talking and exploring, eventually stopping by chance on the very hill where his past love had ended. On that day, the flowers were also in full bloom. Before they left, Sylvia made a flower wreath, handed it to Paul, and asked him to place it on her head. Dienach was stunned. He believed that Anna's soul had been reborn in Sylvia's body to fulfill the promise made 2,000 years prior. That night, for the first time, Dienach fell into a deep sleep after living in the future for a year. He woke up in Greece in 1922, after being in a coma for a year. The story you just heard was translated and edited by George Papahatsis, a Greek jurist and Dienach's favorite student. Papahatsis received hundreds of handwritten pages from Paul Dienach shortly before he passed away from tuberculosis in 1924. Initially, Papahatsis thought it was just a science fiction novel, but he gradually realized it appeared to be Dienach's personal diary. The diary detailed Dienach falling into a coma in 1921 and waking up in 3906. He spent an entire year in the future and recorded everything he saw. Setting the emotional story aside, let's address the most important question: is this early iSky romance story actually true? Personally, I hope it is. But if you believe that imagining hundreds of pages with specific names, locations, dates, and futuristic technologies is convincing proof of time travel, then wouldn't every science fiction writer, including the creator of Doraemon, also be a time traveler? Paul Dienach was in a coma for a full year, which is plenty of time to construct a vivid and detailed future world within his dreams. Or, it is possible that Paul Amadeus Dienach was simply a creation of George Papahatsis himself and never actually existed. In reality, there are no official records of a Paul Dienach living in Switzerland or Greece. The photo often used to illustrate Dienach in videos is actually Daniel Low-Hill, a thief arrested in New Zealand in 1908. George Papahatsis, the man who translated and published the story, claimed that Dienach fought for Germany in World War I and changed his name before moving to Switzerland, which is why no one knows his real name. Papahatsis explained that the original notes were written in German and were confiscated by the military during World War II while he was living in Greece. The very convenient disappearance of the original manuscript makes many people skeptical about the story's authenticity. Furthermore, if you pay attention, many things that are prominent in the 21st century are completely absent from the story, such as social media, the internet, Bitcoin, or artificial intelligence. It seems the imagination of Dienach or Papahatsis was limited by the era in which they lived. The truth has been buried, and we may never know for sure. However, there are still many things in the story worth reflecting on, such as the possibility of mental time travel or the vision of a beautiful world where humanity has evolved in its consciousness. What do you think about this story? Feel free to share your thoughts. For now, goodbye and see you again.